outside on my call, okay? You got it?
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Q-Man channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you enjoy the content. Today, we are going to be discussing the 2007 film, Shooter. The film opens, and we immediately sense the quiet intensity surrounding Bob Lee Swagger, a man whose past as an elite Marine sniper weighs heavily on his shoulders. He's someone clearly haunted, someone who found a certain kind of peace only in the precise solitude of long-range shooting, a skill honed through years serving his country, perhaps reflecting the disciplined focus required in any high-stakes profession where a single mistake costs everything. Now retired, or at least trying to be, he lives a life steeped in the kind of rugged independence often sought by those who have seen too much structured chaos. Suddenly, this isolation is shattered. Swagger is pulled back into the game by Colonel Greg Cuff, a man who speaks with the clipped authority of military bureaucracy. Cuff appeals to Swagger's ingrained sense of duty, presenting a scenario so dire it seems almost unavoidable: an alleged threat to the president during an upcoming public address in Philadelphia. Swagger, despite his deep-seated reservations, the kind that build up after witnessing the messy realities behind clean military victories, agrees to scope out the area, a final consultation before the event. It's a classic setup, the reluctant hero pulled out of retirement, reminiscent perhaps of the archetypes explored in classic westerns, where the best gunman is always needed one last time. Swagger, meticulous as ever, sets up his perch and conducts the surveillance. But when the president appears, the supposed shooter, whom Swagger was meant to track, is nowhere to be seen. Instead, Swagger finds himself walking into an expertly laid trap. Shots ring out, and the situation rapidly devolves into chaos, with Swagger immediately becoming the prime suspect in an assassination attempt. The efficiency of the setup suggests a conspiracy far deeper than a simple rogue operative. He manages a narrow escape, fueled by instinct honed over countless simulated firefights. Now a fugitive, Swagger is relentlessly hunted, not just by the FBI, led by the determined agent Nick Memphis, a young man still believing firmly in the black-and-white nature of justice, but also by dangerous internal forces intent on keeping the truth buried. Swagger's survival depends entirely on utilizing the very skills that made him legendary. His first priority is to find the truth behind the frame-up. He realizes he needs help, finding refuge with Donnie Fenn, a a former spotter and close comrade whose partnership in the field was legendary. These were men who understood nonverbal communication better than spoken word. This reunion is brief and tragic, emphasizing the peril Swagger faces. Donnie is killed, but not before providing a crucial clue: the real shooter. The path inevitably leads him to Sarah, Donnie's widow. Sarah is a figure who carries her own quiet burden, likely accustomed to the shadows that follow men like her husband. Initially resistant, she comes to understand Swagger's desperate need for exoneration. Her presence grounds him, offering a fleeting connection to the normal life he craves. She is the anchor to the moral compass Swagger fights to maintain. As Swagger digs deeper, the pieces point toward a powerful, shadowy figure with significant governmental ties. He uncovers evidence suggesting the entire operation was a false flag, designed to justify a far more aggressive military action overseas, likely involving lucrative arms deals or geopolitical maneuvering that requires public outrage as its catalyst. This narrative echoes the cynical view that sometimes manufactured crises serve powerful interests better than genuine peace. The FBI agent, Memphis, begins to have doubts about the neat narrative presented to him. He notices inconsistencies in the evidence and witnesses' testimonies, the kind of details a dedicated investigator, one who perhaps studied police procedure obsessively, inspired by gritty procedural dramas, would catch. His internal conflict mirrors the audience's growing suspicion. The hunter might be chasing the wrong man. The climax brings Swagger to a confrontation, not in the shadows, but out in the open, orchestrated by Swagger himself to force the real perpetrators into the light. He engineers a scenario mirroring the initial framing, but this time he controls the variables. He uses his mastery of trajectory, environmental awareness, and psychological manipulation to expose the conspiracy involving the powerful interests, perhaps including elements within the military intelligence apparatus that once sponsored him. In the final, tense standoff, Swagger faces the architect of the frame-up. He doesn't just fight, he systematically dismantles their plan, using precision over brute force. Memphis arrives just as the truth is revealed, finally seeing Swagger not as a criminal, but as a man whose honor compelled him to expose corruption, even at the cost of his own freedom. The film concludes with the conspiracy dismantled, though the sense of lingering danger remains. Swagger, having proven his innocence and perhaps re-establishing a sliver of faith in justice, retreats once more into the quiet anonymity he prefers, the lone wolf having successfully defended the system that tried to destroy him. Swagger's initial retreat into the Montana wilderness wasn't merely a geographical change. It was a deep psychological withdrawal. The rugged landscape suited a man whose internal world was defined by precise calculations and the stark reality of life and death seen through a high-powered scope. One could imagine his daily routine mirroring the discipline of his former life. Early mornings, rigorous physical maintenance, and a profound silence broken only by the wind. He wasn't just hiding. He was trying to exorcise the ghosts of missions past, the collateral damage that inevitably stained the hands of even the most principled soldiers. When Cuff arrives, the weight of military expectations settles back onto Swagger's shoulders like a heavy, familiar coat. Cuff, steeped in the institutional belief that complex problems require decisive, often ruthless action, plays upon Swagger's inherent sense of responsibility, a code that runs deeper than personal comfort. Swagger's hesitation is palpable. He understands that stepping back into that world means signing up for moral compromise. His assent is given with the grim acceptance of a man who knows the game is rigged before the first card is dealt. The framing sequence in Philadelphia is executed with terrifying efficiency. It speaks to an enemy capable of mirroring Swagger's own lethal capabilities, an insult that cuts deeper than any physical wound. When the shots are fired and the immediate assumption is his guilt, Swagger reacts with the cold, practiced instinct of someone who has spent years rehearsing emergency responses. His escape is not random flight. it's tactical repositioning, using urban clutter as cover, demonstrating that even under extreme duress, his military training dictates his every move. He is a ghost slipping through the city's grid, visible only to those actively looking for him. The loss of Donnie Fenn is the emotional pivot. Donnie, the partner who saw the world through the other end of Swagger's scope, represented the last tangible connection to a life of defined loyalty. His death is brutal, reinforcing that the conspiracy values absolute silence. For Swagger, this loss ignites a fury beneath the calm veneer. It transforms his defense into a relentless pursuit of vengeance, filtered through his methodical nature. Sarah, Donnie's widow, becomes the reluctant repository of Swagger's truth. She carries the sorrow common to the families of covert operators, the waiting, the unspoken knowledge that their loved ones operate outside the conventional rules. When she chooses to trust Swagger, it is an act of faith rooted in her understanding of the warrior ethos. She knows the man Donnie respected would not commit such an act of betrayal. Her quiet strength provides a necessary counterpoint to Swagger's escalating violence, reminding him of the innocence he is fighting to preserve. As Agent Memphis closes in, he represents the ideal the system pretends to uphold. Memphis is tenacious, driven by the absolute certainty of protocol. His slow, agonizing realization that the evidence is too perfect, too manufactured, is the film's secondary narrative tension. He sees the patterns that Swagger's pursuers overlooked, the deliberate planting of ballistic evidence, the convenient suicide of a supposed accomplice. Memphis's journey mirrors Swagger's in reverse, moving from rigid adherence to the rules toward a messy, necessary acceptance of situational truth. Swagger's counteroffensive is a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare, leveraging his intimate knowledge of surveillance, counter-surveillance, and the bureaucracy that employs men like Cuff. He doesn't just fight back, he lays traps designed to expose the architect's own vulnerabilities, manipulating media attention and law enforcement focus. The final confrontation, orchestrated to expose the political mastermind, a man perhaps groomed in the same strategic schools Swagger once attended, is not about killing the enemy, but about proving their machinations beyond any reasonable doubt. It's a sniper's ultimate trick, making the target kill himself with the wrong target. In the end, Swagger achieves a grim victory, reclaiming his honor not through military citation, but through the defiant, solitary act of setting the record straight against overwhelming institutional power. The mechanics of Swagger's survival are deeply rooted in the psychological conditioning of elite military training. Every move he makes against the vast network hunting him is a calculated countermove. When he needs to secure resources or transport, he doesn't rely on conventional means. He exploits known vulnerabilities in logistics chains, areas he likely mapped extensively during his service for potential enemy ingress or egress. This suggests a man for whom contingency planning is not an academic exercise, but a visceral second nature. One imagines his mind constantly running scenarios, overlaid with terrain data and probability tables, a habit impossible to shed. His pursuit of the mastermind reveals the chilling symbiosis between global politics and the private security apparatus. The villain, likely a defense contractor or high-ranking official operating outside typical oversight, embodies the kind of unchecked ambition Swagger spent his career fighting against overseas. This adversary views life, and especially national security crises, as commodities, opportunities for profit and power consolidation. This contrast between the sniper who kills only when ordered for a specific strategic goal and the corrupt official who engineers crises for financial gain defines the moral chasm Swagger must cross. The development of the relationship with Sarah takes on a desperate urgency. She becomes more than just a source of information. She is a fragile testament to the human cost of the shadows these men inhabit. When Swagger shares details of the setup, his voice likely carries the careful modulation of a man who fears even his own words might be monitored. He is exposing his soul, piece by piece, to the one person who can understand the burden of a life defined by lethal competence. Her support isn't loud, it's the quiet act of tending to his wounds, both physical and psychological, allowing the hardened shell of the sniper to momentarily crack. Agent Memphis's gradual conversion is fascinating. His initial fervor, fueled by career ambition and a textbook belief in immediate guilt, slowly erodes as the evidence seems too neatly packaged. Memphis likely spent late nights poring over surveillance footage, noticing the minute discrepancies, a lack of anticipated recoil, an unnatural shadow in the periphery, details that only someone intimately familiar with tactical operations would flag. This internal crisis forces the FBI agent to confront the possibility that the institution he serves is profoundly corrupt, a realization that often breaks men who place ultimate faith in the badge. His final decision to align, however briefly, with Swagger is the moment he chooses actual justice over procedural correctness. The finale is orchestrated chaos, controlled entirely by Swagger's long-range vision. He doesn't seek a direct firefight. He engineers a situation where the guilty parties must expose their complicity through their own panicked reactions, often using the environment to his advantage, a classic sniper tactic applied to urban warfare. He manipulates sightlines, forcing the conspirators to expose themselves to the surveillance they thought they controlled. When the true orchestrator is cornered, the confrontation is less about bullets and more about the dismantling of a facade. Swagger's final act is to ensure the evidence is irrefutable, leaving behind not a body count, but an undeniable paper trail of treason, a victory achieved through intelligence rather than brute force, allowing the system, through Memphis, a chance to tentatively self-correct. Swagger then vanishes, understanding that true safety lies in the unmapped territories, far from the structures of power he just exposed. The aftermath of the exposure leaves Swagger in a state of profound exhaustion, a weariness that transcends mere physical fatigue and settles deep into the bone. He has won the battle against the immediate threat, but the larger war, the perpetual conflict between institutional corruption and individual integrity, remains unending. Returning to the solitude of the wild, he carries the burden of having seen the machinery of power at its most depraved, confirming every cynical doubt he ever harbored about the motives behind grand governmental gestures. He likely cleans his rifles with an almost ritualistic fervor, each motion a way to impose order on the moral chaos he just navigated. The silence now is different. It's heavier, imbued with the knowledge of necessary violence and the ghosts of those he couldn't save, especially Donnie. Agent Memphis, having witnessed the truth firsthand, faces his own career crossroads. He possesses the documented proof that could dismantle entire departments, yet he must navigate the treacherous currents of internal affairs, knowing that rooting out corruption at that level can be a career-ending or even life-threatening endeavor. His commitment to Swagger's innocence, and by extension, his disillusionment with the official narrative, will define his future actions. He is now a man burdened by classified knowledge, forced to operate with a calculated ambiguity, perhaps channeling the stoicism of the detectives in his favorite cold case files as he prepares for the bureaucratic fallout. Sarah, too, finds a new, quiet resilience. The truth of Donnie's involvement and the danger he faced might provide a strange kind of closure. She now understands that Donnie died not in vain, but as a casualty in a fight whose parameters were deliberately obscured by those in command. Her future might involve stepping away from the life that perpetually shadowed her husband, perhaps using any resources secured by Swagger's actions to build a life unattached to the military-industrial complex, finally finding the peace that eluded Donnie. Swagger's ultimate disappearance isn't an admission of defeat, but a strategic withdrawal. He knows that as long as he remains visible, he remains a liability to those who survived the purge. He likely chooses a location even more remote, a place where his skills are purely for self-preservation, far from any signal grid or navigable road. The film leaves us with the understanding that a man like Bob Lee Swagger cannot simply re-assimilate. His exceptional nature demands isolation. He remains the ultimate sentinel, permanently stationed on the perimeter of civilized society, forever watching for the next instance where precision and honor must confront manufactured lies, content to be the unacknowledged guardian against the darkness lurking just beyond the horizon. The transition back to isolation is not seamless. It is a jarring re-entry into a world stripped of immediate purpose. Swagger settles into his new hidden existence, but the quiet of the wilderness is now permeated by a hyper-awareness, a constant auditory filtering of every snap of a twig or distant engine sound, the indelible mark of a man whose survival depends on processing threats faster than they materialize. His movements become even more economical, every action stripped down to pure necessity, reflecting a man conserving energy for the next inevitable confrontation. The ethical clarity he achieved by exposing the conspiracy is fleeting. He understands that systemic rot rarely dies from a single excision, often just metastasizing under new leadership. Memphis's subsequent actions are fraught with necessary caution. He cannot simply hand over the unvarnished truth without inviting professional ruin or worse. Instead, he likely engages in a strategic game of bureaucratic defense, leaking key pieces of information through carefully vetted, skeptical journalists or internal inspectors general, the modern equivalent of setting up long-range surveillance on his own superiors. He walks a tightrope, utilizing the very procedural framework that initially sought to convict Swagger to slowly dismantle the remnants of the conspiracy from within, demonstrating a professional courage forged in his unexpected alliance with the fugitive sniper. His career trajectory shifts from climbing the ladder to quietly safeguarding the integrity of the investigative process itself. Sarah's newfound fortitude is channeled into ensuring Donnie's memory is honored correctly, perhaps by advocating for accountability for the operatives who used her husband as a pawn. Her emotional journey is one of transforming grief into quiet activism, finding solidarity with the few trustworthy figures she encountered during the ordeal, potentially maintaining a clandestine correspondence with Memphis, their shared knowledge binding them in a silent pact of disillusionment. She represents the civilians forever marked by the clandestine wars waged by professional soldiers and the politicians who profit from them. Swagger's prolonged anonymity suggests a deep-seated conviction that his unique skill set is best employed as a deterrent rather than an active participant in flawed human systems. He isn't merely hiding from the government. He is actively observing the geopolitical chessboard, recognizing that the same forces that framed him are likely already planning the next manufactured conflict. His existence becomes a permanent, self-imposed overwatch. He embodies the tragic realization that the most honorable men are often those forced to operate entirely outside the established structure, becoming necessary ghosts whose only legacy is the quiet absence of catastrophe they managed to prevent through unseen vigilance. He has traded the pride of service for the lonely duty of true protection. The final withdrawal of Swagger into the truly untracked territories speaks volumes about the nature of heroism when divorced from official sanction. He is no longer seeking redemption in the eyes of the public or the establishment. His validation is purely internal, measured only by the distance he maintains between himself and the corrupt structures he exposed. One can imagine his days are structured around self-sufficiency, perhaps integrating rudimentary survival tactics with the high-tech knowledge of surveillance avoidance he possesses, a blend of ancient wilderness mastery and modern espionage countermeasures. This level of enforced solitude is inherently fragile. It requires constant, perfect execution to maintain. Memphis, navigating the treacherous political waters following the exposé, embodies the difficult transition from believing in rules to understanding necessity. His commitment to justice now demands a constant balancing act, exposing just enough truth to satisfy oversight committees without triggering the systemic backlash that would bury the evidence and him along with it. He likely becomes a man perpetually looking over his shoulder, his dedication to the law now twisted into a necessary game of subterfuge against those within the very agencies he serves. His pursuit of swagger ends not with an arrest warrant, but with a silent acknowledgement that some men are better situated outside the reach of the law to uphold a higher standard. Sarah's quiet strength solidifies into a practical determination to sever ties completely with the world that consumed Donnie. Her future is defined by autonomy, perhaps utilizing the discreet assistance offered by Swagger or Memphis to secure a life that can never again be easily leveraged by shadowy organizations. She becomes the living proof of the cost of these covert operations, a civilian casualty who manages to survive and rebuild, a testament to the resilience required when loved ones are consumed by missions cloaked in secrecy. Swagger's enduring vigil is the film's final unspoken commentary. He is the ultimate professional who learned the hard lesson. Loyalty is misplaced when directed toward compromised authority. His isolation is not punishment, but strategic positioning. He is the ultimate deterrent, the high-ground observer whose very existence, the known capability of an exonerated, highly skilled operative living off the grid, may serve to keep ambitious villains in check more effectively than any prison sentence. He has become the myth, the cautionary tale whispered in the halls of power. The sniper who walked away and remains forever positioned to take the shot that matters most, even if that shot is simply the refusal to engage, unless the defense of fundamental truth absolutely demands it. The enduring silence that settles over Swagger's remote existence is less a sign of peace and more a state of permanent operational readiness. He exists in a self-imposed Cold War, every breath a tactical decision. The landscape itself becomes his confidant and his shield, a natural camouflage that offers greater protection than any technological means could afford against the agencies that still hold his file active. He doesn't just live off the land, he integrates with it, viewing the environment through the pragmatic lens of a survivalist who knows that the real enemy often wears a uniform or carries a briefcase. This profound self-reliance hints at a man who has finally accepted that the ultimate integrity lies solely within one's own disciplined actions, unmoored from any organizational validation. Memphis's new reality involves navigating the bureaucracy's slow, grudging admission of fault. The investigation into the conspiracy moves at the pace of institutional self-preservation, characterized by suppressed reports and carefully curated omissions designed to protect higher-ranking officials. Memphis fights these paper barriers with the same dogged tenacity he once applied to tracking criminals, understanding that destroying an influential power structure requires meticulous documentation and strategic timing, not brute force confrontation. He becomes a silent advocate for Swagger's existence, perhaps ensuring that certain avenues of investigation remain perpetually open, a subtle nod to the man who showed him the true corruption embedded within the system's core. His career is perhaps permanently stalled below its potential, a necessary sacrifice for maintaining a clear conscience in a compromised field. Sarah, meanwhile, embodies the quiet reconstruction of a life shattered by external violence. Her strength is not martial, but moral. She likely channels her energy into advocating for better protections or transparency for families of operatives, transforming personal tragedy into a force for systemic change, albeit on a smaller, community-focused scale. She remains the human touchstone in the narrative, the reminder of what Swagger and Memphis fought to protect. The ordinary lives disrupted by extraordinary malice. Her detachment from the high-stakes world provides a stark contrast to Swagger's continued immersion in it, albeit from a distance. Swagger's continued anonymity is the film's lasting legacy. He is the living embodiment of vigilance, the man who proved that accountability sometimes requires operating entirely outside the accountability structures. He has achieved a kind of ultimate professional freedom, the freedom to judge and act without oversight, because he is the only one left with unimpeachable honor. His tale serves as a perpetual, unspoken warning to those who wield power carelessly. There remains one man, expertly trained, who knows all the rules and is now operating entirely by his own, watching from the quiet edges of civilization. He waits, not for a call to duty, but for the next clear sign that the forces he fought are resurfacing, ready to strike with the cold, precise lethality of a perfectly aimed shot. The true weight of Swagger's solitude is the conscious decision to forgo any form of external validation. He has accepted that his redemption will never be broadcast on the news or formally ratified by a government board. This self-imposed exile suggests a profound understanding of true efficacy. Sometimes, the greatest service is performed by remaining unseen, a shadow whose potential intervention keeps worse scenarios at bay. He lives by the creed that visibility equals vulnerability, a lesson paid for in the blood of comrades and nearly his own. One imagines his routine now includes studying satellite imagery or open-source intelligence updates, still tracking the geopolitical pulse, driven not by patriotism to a flag, but by a duty to a higher, unseen moral code that transcends national boundaries or shifting political winds. Memphis's internal struggle shifts from resolving Swagger's case to managing the fallout of the initial victory. He understands that while the primary conspirators may be neutralized or discredited, the infrastructure that enabled them, the interlocking web of defense contracts, lobbying interests, and intelligence officials, remains intact, merely adopting new faces. His actions become slower, more deliberate, perhaps mimicking the long-term patience of a dedicated cold case detective rather than the immediate drive of an active agent. He occasionally looks toward the vast, unmappable regions of the country, a silent acknowledgement of Swagger's continued, necessary watchfulness. He carries the weary wisdom that dismantling corruption is a slow erosion, not a sudden explosion, and he dedicates his career to that slow grind, using the procedural tools against his former colleagues. Sarah finds solace in creating tangible connections to reality, perhaps involving herself in local nonprofit work or environmental conservation, activities that stand in stark contrast to the abstract violence of her past. Her resilience is quiet but absolute. She refuses to be defined as a victim, instead embodying the strength of those left behind by the shadow warriors. She occasionally receives untraceable, practical gifts, a new piece of reliable equipment, a perfectly preserved historical book, small acknowledgments from Swagger that confirm his continued existence and unspoken protection. These gestures are her only remaining link to the world of precision and duty that took her husband. Swagger's continued mastery over evasion suggests he has elevated his skill set beyond mere fieldcraft into an art form of invisibility. He is the ghost in the machine, a counter-narrative to the constant surveillance society projects. He is no longer merely a sniper. He is the ultimate system analyst, capable of predicting bureaucratic choke points and anticipating the counter-moves of his former institutional peers. His final state is one of perpetual readiness, not waiting for disaster, but ensuring through his very hidden presence that the mechanisms of power remain slightly more honest than they would be otherwise. He has become the silent, untraceable guardian of the very principles the system he once served failed to uphold. The landscape that shelters Swagger has become his ultimate fortress, a testament to the idea that true power can sometimes reside in absolute withdrawal. His existence is a continuous, deliberate act of denial to the institutions seeking to categorize, control, or eliminate him. He is meticulously careful, viewing every interaction with the natural world as a potential intelligence leak. One imagines he has become adept at reading the slightest shifts in weather patterns, wind direction, and animal behavior, data points far more reliable than any official briefing he ever received. This enforced self-reliance breeds a stoicism that borders on the ascetic. Comfort is irrelevant. Only operational security matters. He has traded the uniform for the wilderness, but the discipline of the sniper remains his unshakable framework. Memphis, now entrenched in the difficult work of internal cleanup, understands that official commendations are meaningless smokescreens. His true reward is the slow, almost imperceptible tilting of the scales toward actual accountability. He operates with the weary skepticism of someone who has stared into the abyss of governmental dishonesty and survived. His desk at the FBI might be littered with the detritus of endless bureaucratic skirmishes, but his focus is fixed on preventing another Swagger scenario. He never speaks Swagger's name publicly, but every policy recommendation he pushes, every procedural amendment he fights for, is an unspoken tribute to the man who forced the truth into the daylight. He understands that a true ally doesn't need recognition. They just need the space to continue their necessary work, even if that work is done in isolation. Sarah's transformation is perhaps the most poignant. She is the living embodiment of the collateral damage that the military-industrial complex perpetually ignores. Her energy is now directed toward building tangible, ethical structures in her community, a stark opposition to the abstract, destructive interests that claimed Donnie. Her quiet defiance is an act of profound respect for the man she loved, refusing to let his memory be subsumed by the official narrative of a dangerous job gone wrong. Any communication she receives from Swagger, perhaps a rare, untraceable package containing specialized, untainted survival gear, is not an invitation back into the fight, but a confirmation that honor still exists somewhere outside the fray, a belief system she quietly upholds. Swagger's continued presence outside the grid is the ultimate checkmate. He has transcended being a mere operative. He is now a permanent, unresolved variable in the power equations of the state. His very survival proves that systemic corruption can be successfully resisted by an individual operating outside its established parameters. He waits, a silent sentinel against the darkness, proving that the highest form of service is sometimes refusing to be part of the game altogether. He is the living proof that the skills intended for warfare can be repurposed for defense, the defense of objective truth, a final, definitive act of patriotism that required deserting the very institutions that claim to represent it. The profound silence that envelops Swagger's chosen refuge is deceptive. It is the quiet that precedes a storm, or perhaps, the deep calm of a perfectly prepared ambush site. He has achieved a unique form of mastery, the ability to be utterly present while remaining completely untraceable. This mastery isn't about avoiding detection by law enforcement in the conventional sense, but about preempting the large-scale surveillance apparatus that governments deploy. He likely employs low-tech solutions, smoke, mirrors of natural terrain, and sheer psychological misdirection to defeat high-tech tracking, a fitting metaphor for his entire conflict. The sniper's focus, once directed toward a target's millimeter-precise location, is now applied to filtering the vast noise of the modern world down to the essential actionable threats. Memphis's trajectory within the FBI becomes a delicate dance between integrity and institutional survival. He realizes that true institutional change is glacial, and his best immediate impact is achieved by strategically placing obstacles in the path of potential future malfeasance, often masquerading as diligent adherence to revised protocol. He becomes the Bureau's internal conscience, a man whose past alliance with a fugitive has paradoxically made him a more effective, if permanently scrutinized, agent. He carries the unspoken weight of knowing that true heroes like Swagger are often the ones the system must simultaneously pursue and protect, a contradiction that sharpens his own ethical edge. He views his career not as climbing a ladder, but as maintaining a thin, brittle line between order and complete cover-up. Sarah's quiet strength blossoms into a measured independence. She has learned that the only reliable allies are those bound by genuine respect, not by contract or oath. She might engage in work that directly challenges environmental degradation or corporate encroachment, areas often tied to the same geopolitical maneuvering that necessitated Swagger's framing. This dedication is her way of honoring Donnie by fighting for a world worth living in, a world less susceptible to the high-level manipulations that tore her life apart. Her occasional anonymous contact with Swagger serves as a necessary tether, a confirmation that ethical competence still exists in the extreme margins of society. Swagger himself has transcended the identity of the hunted or the avenger. He has become a force of nature, a self-sustaining principle of resistance, His vigilance is not passive waiting. It is an active, subtle field of influence. He knows that the powers he exposed are deeply cautious now, aware that an unpredictable, highly capable expert is operating beyond their jurisdiction. This awareness is Swagger's final, most potent weapon. He has secured the ultimate high ground, moral and geographical, ensuring that the next time a massive, fraudulent operation is planned, the potential architects will pause, considering the unpredictable, lethal consequences of activating a ghost who once wore the same uniform. His existence is the ultimate deterrent against unchecked authority. He has transcended the identity of the hunted or the avenger. He is now a force of nature, a self-sustaining principle of resistance. The psychological landscape Swagger inhabits is one of perpetual mourning masked by supreme control. His emotional landscape is defined by the absence of Donnie, a void that no amount of pristine wilderness can fill. This loss fuels a deep, abiding cynicism toward any collective endeavor, reinforcing his belief that true honor can only be maintained in radical isolation. He views the world through a lens sharpened by betrayal, understanding that structure, whether military, governmental, or social, is merely a scaffold upon which the ambitious and corrupt build their empires. When he trains, it's not for an expected mission, but as a spiritual discipline, ensuring his competence remains absolute, a final, non-negotiable promise to the memory of his fallen partner. Memphis carries the scars of his forced enlightenment internally. He operates with a grim, procedural efficiency, aware that every internal review board and every security clearance he signs off on is a potential weak point in the system he now fights to purify. He has become the reluctant historian of the conspiracy, meticulously documenting the paper trail of deceit, knowing that the evidence he can never officially submit must remain stored in non-sanctioned, fiercely protected backups, digital fallout shelters designed to survive the inevitable cover-up. His interactions are guarded, his demeanor perpetually weary, the weight of institutional hypocrisy settling heavily on his shoulders like an ill-fitting uniform. He respects Swagger not as a criminal, but as an embodiment of moral clarity achieved through extreme consequence. Sarah's piece is carefully curated, built on separating herself from the infrastructure that facilitated Donnie's death. She may have consciously rejected the material wealth often associated with military service, instead prioritizing authenticity and tangible community benefit. Her resilience is her quiet rejection of the necessary sacrifice narrative used to silence families. She is the anchor of accessible humanity in this narrative of elite operators and political machinations. A woman whose greatest victory is ensuring that the future she builds for herself is one lived entirely in the light, far from the scopes and shadows that consume the men she loved. Swagger's final status is that of an unofficial, untraceable deterrent. He is the system's worst nightmare, a highly skilled asset who has gone entirely off the ledger, operating by self-derived, incorruptible ethics. The narrative concludes not with his re-entry or arrest, but with the established tension of his continued absence. He remains poised on the edge of civilization, a living testament to the cost of unchecked power. His legacy is not a medal, but the fear of his potential reappearance, a fear that forces the hidden architects of chaos to temper their ambitions, knowing that somewhere in the vast, unmapped expanse, the ultimate professional is still watching, waiting for a threat that truly warrants the expenditure of his lethal, solitary focus. Mark Wahlberg's portrayal of Bob Lee Swagger in Shooter anchors a film that navigates the murky waters of government conspiracy, misplaced trust, and the profound weight of professional expertise. Swagger is not merely an action hero, he is a meticulously trained marksman, a product of elite military conditioning, specifically Scout Sniper School, where the ethos of observation, patience, and lethal precision is forged. His background, deeply rooted in the Marine Corps, informs every decision he makes, even when he is an outcast, forced into a life of self-imposed isolation following a disastrous mission in Addis Ababa that cost the life of his spotter, Donnie Fenn. This traumatic history is crucial, It colors his paranoia and fuels his initial reluctance to re-engage with the world, making his eventual confrontation with the forces arrayed against him intensely personal. The film expertly utilizes Swagger's specialized skill set to build tension. Antoine Fuqua, directing here, understands that a sniper's greatest weapon is not always the rifle, but the understanding of angles, windage, and human patterns. When Swagger is set up, framed for the attempted assassination of the president, the narrative immediately shifts from a story about a skilled veteran to a desperate race for vindication. The setup is sophisticated, relying on the presumed infallibility of the U.S. government intelligence apparatus. That this apparatus can be so easily corrupted, serving clandestine political interests rather than national security, is the film's central critique. The supporting cast plays key roles in grounding Swagger's journey. Michael Peña's portrayal of Nick Memphis, the inexperienced but ethically driven FBI agent, provides a necessary counterpoint to Swagger's hardened cynicism. Memphis represents the honest cop still trapped within a compromised system. Their evolving partnership is earned, built not on immediate friendship, but on mutual realization of the scale of the cover-up. Similarly, Kate Mara's character, Sarah Fenn, Donnie's widow, serves as a bridge to Swagger's past and a source of quiet emotional support. Her understanding of the sniper brotherhood, having lived alongside it, allows her to trust Swagger where others see only a fugitive. The visual language of Shooter often emphasizes vast, lonely landscapes, mountain ranges, desolate highways, reflecting Swagger's alienation. When he finally decides to fight back, he turns the very tools used against him into instruments of justice. The famous sequence where he builds a custom rifle from scavenged parts highlights his resourcefulness and deep technical knowledge. He doesn't just use a weapon, he understands its metallurgy and engineering to an almost obsessive degree. The film draws clear inspiration from classic paranoia thrillers of the 1970s, echoing themes found in films like The Conversation or 3 Days of the Condor, where the individual must use intellect to dismantle powerful, unseen enemies. However, Shooter updates this paranoia with the contemporary anxieties surrounding technological surveillance and the weaponization of intelligence assets. The antagonists, particularly the shadowy corporate interests backing the assassination plot, represent a modern form of unchecked power that transcends traditional political boundaries. Swagger's success is ultimately a testament to the enduring truth that sometimes the best defense against corruption is the individual who knows precisely how to hide in plain sight and strike with perfect, devastating accuracy when the moment is right. His final actions are not about seeking revenge, but about restoring a fragile sense of order by exposing the rot at the system's core. Swagger's exile is more than just physical separation. It is a deep psychological retreat necessitated by the moral injury inflicted during his final deployment. The Addis Ababa incident, where a miscommunication or deliberately skewed intel led to civilian casualties alongside the target, shattered his belief in the sanctity of his orders. This breach of trust resonates deeply with the military training ethos. A sniper is supposed to be the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner in a precise scenario, responsible for every consequence. When the system he served demonstrates it cannot handle that responsibility, he withdraws, becoming a ghost, living in the quiet rhythm of the wilderness, far from the cacophony of political machinations. Mark Wahlberg, whose own early career was built on a persona of aggressive masculinity, expertly dials this back in Shooter, presenting a man whose strength is characterized by stillness and coiled tension rather than explosive action. His eyes often convey the years of vigilance, the constant scanning of the perimeter, a trait that serves him well when he realizes he is being hunted by those he once trusted. The narrative cleverly exploits the fact that a master sniper is inherently difficult to catch because he anticipates movement, understands probability, and minimizes his own signature. He operates outside the normal parameters of police procedure. The dynamic with Nick Memphis deepens as the film progresses, becoming the film's emotional core. Memphis, initially eager to prove himself within the Bureau, is forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that his superiors are either complicit or willfully blind. His youthful idealism clashes beautifully with Swagger's grizzled realism. When Memphis finally makes the crucial decision to abandon protocol and actively aid the fugitive, it symbolizes a personal redemption, a choice to uphold the spirit of the law over its corrupted letter. This alliance is necessary because Swagger, brilliant as he is with long-range ballistics, lacks the necessary access to the bureaucratic infrastructure that is hunting him. Memphis provides the necessary entry point back into the system he must dismantle from the outside. The technical detail dedicated to marksmanship elevates the film beyond standard thriller fare. When Swagger is retrieving equipment or analyzing trajectories, the focus is sharp and unwavering, mirroring his own mental state. He treats weaponry not as props, but as extensions of his intellect. His methodical approach to setting up his final confrontation in the remote location, choosing elevation, factoring in air density, and predicting security rotations, is a masterclass in operational planning, suggesting that true expertise is about preparation, not improvisation. This contrasts sharply with the sloppy, overconfident actions of the conspirators, who rely on bureaucratic cover and the assumption that no one could possibly see through their elaborate stagecraft. Ultimately, Shooter functions as a cautionary tale about the privatization of war and intelligence. The antagonists are not foreign enemies. They are domestic entities leveraging massive government contracts for profit, viewing political instability as a marketable product. Swagger, the ultimate tool of the state, becomes the ultimate threat to that corrupt infrastructure because he understands its weaknesses intimately. His pursuit of justice is not just self-preservation. It is a necessary, violent rebuttal to the perversion of his professional oath. He cleans up the mess because the established order is incapable or unwilling to do so. Swagger's existence after Addis Ababa is defined by the rigid discipline he imposes upon himself, a self-imposed penance. He lives lean, minimizing his footprint not just geographically but emotionally. This forced asceticism makes his eventual reconnection with Sarah Fenn all the more poignant. Sarah carries the quiet grief of a spouse whose loved one died serving the very ideals Swagger now fights against. Her initial suspicion melts away because she recognizes the integrity that lies beneath his weathered exterior, the same unwavering commitment to truth that defined Donnie. Their relationship is one of shared ghosts. She allows him the vulnerability of remembrance, something the rest of the world has denied him since his official designation as a pariah. The film's visual storytelling repeatedly contrasts Swagger's deliberate pace with the frantic, often clumsy efforts of his pursuers. When he is cornered in the city, his movements are economical, using urban clutter, a construction site, a busy street corner, as instant camouflage, transforming mundane environments into tactical advantages. This showcases the psychological depth of his training. He doesn't just react to threats, he architects scenarios where threats cease to exist by managing the variables, visibility, distance, and time, with mathematical certainty. This is the difference between a criminal running and a highly trained operative executing a pre-planned maneuver. Nick Memphis's transformation from wide-eyed agent to loyal accomplice is a critical emotional arc. He starts by meticulously following procedure, convinced of the institutional checks and balances. The moment he sees the evidence Swagger presents, which points unequivocally to high-level manipulation, a pattern of falsified documents, suppressed communications, his faith fractures. His decision to risk his career, and perhaps his life, to meet Swagger is an act of true heroism, mirroring the sacrifices made by soldiers in the field. Memphis has to learn to think like an enemy operative rather than a federal investigator, shifting his focus from proving a case to surviving an ambush. The overarching theme of expertise being weaponized against the expert is central to the film's commentary on modern security politics. Swagger is a cautionary symbol. The state creates these perfect instruments of specialized power, trains them in absolute loyalty, and then discards or silences them the moment they become inconvenient political liabilities. The conspirators, led by the character of Senator Johnson and the private military contractor figurehead, operate on the assumption that they are above accountability because they control the narrative channels. Their mistake is underestimating the individual capacity for truth-seeking when that individual happens to be the most skilled operative they have ever produced. Swagger's final stand, though rooted in violent resolution, is philosophically about data integrity. He doesn't just want to kill the people responsible. He needs to present irrefutable proof that forces the system to acknowledge its own failure. His meticulously planned ambush is designed to be public, visible, and undeniable, forcing a media cascade that the conspirators cannot control with simple obfuscation. This act is the ultimate expression of a military creed applied to civil justice. Ensure the target is neutralized, and ensure the intelligence supporting the action is flawless and undeniable. The resulting silence from the government apparatus following his actions speaks volumes about the successful, if temporary, disruption of corrupt authority. The enduring resonance of Shooter lies in its powerful depiction of how institutional structures betray the very individuals who uphold them, forcing highly skilled professionals into the role of vigilante simply to restore equilibrium. Swagger embodies the archetype of the betrayed protector, a man whose dedication to duty becomes the very tool of his persecution. His skills, honed through years of rigorous, almost spiritual commitment to the sniper's craft, understanding the Earth's rotation, the minute effect of humidity on bullet flight, are now turned against the architects of the deceit. This is not merely about surviving. It is about proving that expertise, when divorced from corruption, remains a formidable, almost sacred power. The film's visual aesthetic often highlights Swagger's profound sense of disconnection. Long shots frequently frame him against overwhelming natural backdrops, emphasizing his smallness against the vastness of the American landscape, yet simultaneously suggesting that nature itself provides better sanctuary and more honest rules than Washington, D.C. When he infiltrates secure locations, the camera work shifts to mimic his point of view. Tense, focused, prioritizing subtle movement over grand gestures. This intimacy with his perspective forces the audience to adopt his necessary caution, experiencing the world through the narrow, high-magnification scope of necessary survival. The resolution hinges on Swagger's ability to weaponize information as effectively as he wields ballistics. The conspiracy's fatal flaw is their reliance on layers of plausible deniability. They believe that if the physical threat, Swagger, is eliminated, the narrative remains controllable. Swagger, understanding the operational life cycle of a covert mission, knows that the only way to truly dismantle the operation is to breach the secrecy surrounding it. His meticulous documentation and strategic use of the media, guided by the residual connections Sarah Fenn might still possess, or the emerging journalistic integrity he sees in the periphery, are his equivalent of a perfectly placed round. He forces accountability by making the cost of continued silence higher than the cost of exposure. Furthermore, the film subtly explores the burden of hypercompetence. Swagger is lonely not just because he is hunted, but because few can truly comprehend the mental framework required to operate at his level. His interactions are filtered through the lens of threat assessment. Every conversation is a micro-interrogation. This emotional isolation makes his reliance on Memphis and Sarah all the more significant. They are the few who accept his reality without demanding he become less dangerous. They allow him to be the expert without forcing him to apologize for the consequences of that expertise. In a world saturated with mediocrity and political maneuvering, Swagger's terrifying competence becomes the only viable form of genuine heroism left standing. The very silence Swagger seeks in the wilderness is mirrored by the silence imposed upon him by the government he once served with unwavering dedication. This enforced quietude, however, proves deceptive. For a man whose entire training revolved around listening for the imperceptible, the shift in air pressure, the faint scrape of a boot on gravel, The quiet became an amplifier for the truth he suspected. His life in exile was not about forgetting his past as a Marine scout sniper, but about reprocessing the failures, analyzing the intelligence gaps that led to Donnie Fenn's death. This relentless internal review is what allows him to spot the infinitesimal flaws in the assassination frame-up, recognizing patterns of procedural deviation that a standard federal agent would easily overlook as bureaucratic error. The emotional complexity Wahlberg brings to the role transcends simple stoicism. There's a palpable weariness, a sense that carrying the weight of his lethal capabilities is a burden only momentarily alleviated by righteous action. When he interacts with Sarah, the shared grief creates a fragile, unspoken bond. She sees past the fugitive, recognizing the soldier trapped within, the man whose code of honor remains intact even when the structure supporting that code has crumbled. Their moments together are brief but essential, providing the necessary human anchor for a character perpetually operating on the edge of operational necessity. Memphis's development is crucial because he acts as the audience's surrogate, moving from institutional belief to principled doubt. His infiltration of the conspiracy's records, often performed under extreme duress and against direct orders, is the antithesis of Swagger's sniper doctrine. Where Swagger eliminates the threat from a distance with surgical precision, Memphis dismantles the conspiracy from within using paperwork and procedural leverage. This duality, the outside demolition versus the inside structural collapse, is what makes their combined effort effective. Memphis learns that true adherence to justice sometimes requires temporary, calculated treason against a compromised authority. The film's commentary sharpens when focusing on the sheer scale of the resources marshaled against Swagger. He is pursued by highly trained operatives, men who speak the same professional language, but whose loyalty is bought rather than earned. This pursuit highlights the fundamental difference between military professionalism aimed at protecting national interests and mercenary efficiency focused solely on profit and operational secrecy. Swagger's ability to evade these technologically superior hunters for so long confirms that his intimate knowledge of military doctrine, its blind spots, its standard response times, its logistical chains, is his most potent defense. He knows how they think, because he was forged in the same fires. The final confrontation sequence is a deliberate inversion of the initial setup. Where the president was targeted in a public, high-stakes environment designed for maximum spectacle, Swagger orchestrates his own exposure in a location chosen for its tactical superiority and its capacity to draw in the highest echelons of the corrupt structure. It is a final lesson in applied trigonometry and risk management, ensuring that in taking down the conspirators, he also ensures the evidence they possess is irrefutably linked to their guilt. The meticulous planning confirms that for Bob Lee Swagger, survival is secondary to the restoration of verifiable truth, cementing his legacy not as a lone wolf, but as the ultimate, albeit disillusioned, guardian of the system's integrity. The emotional core of Swagger's isolation is rooted in the concept of the ghost in the machine, the realization that the ultimate enemy isn't some external threat, but the very apparatus designed to protect him. His Marine Corps ethos dictates that a mission failure demands accountability, but when the system itself orchestrates the failure and then blames the operative, the soldier is left morally adrift. This narrative choice taps into a deep-seated cultural anxiety about accountability at the highest levels of power. When the truth is negotiable, an expert whose life is built on measurable, verifiable facts finds himself unmoored. Wahlberg subtly conveys this by making Swagger physically meticulous. Every movement is calculated to conserve energy and minimize visibility. But internally, he is driven by a desperate need to re-establish a fixed moral baseline. The environment Swagger navigates often serve as emotional barometers. The early scenes in the mountains are quiet, vast, and honest, reflecting the clarity of purpose he once held. Once he is forced back into civilization to clear his name, the city becomes a hostile, claustrophobic maze. He moves through crowds not seeking anonymity, but rather seeking tactical coverage, treating every civilian as a potential vector for intelligence or threat. This constant vigilance precludes genuine connection, making the brief moments of trust with Sarah Fenn feel like stolen breaths in a toxic atmosphere. She understands the language of service, even if she doesn't speak the language of high-precision shooting. Nick Memphis, in his pursuit, embodies the conflict between procedural adherence and moral imperative. His investigation stalls not because he lacks skill, but because the official channels are deliberately misleading him. The moment he deciphers the doctored surveillance logs or recognizes the false paper trail regarding the stolen rifles, his FBI training flips from defense mechanism to offensive weapon. He starts anticipating the cover-up instead of anticipating the suspect. This shift requires immense courage, as his entire professional identity is predicated on operating within established boundaries. His decision to manually upload the damning evidence, a direct violation of protocol, is the film's most significant act of internal rebellion, proving that systemic integrity can sometimes only be restored by those willing to break systemic rules. The film's antagonists are intentionally kept somewhat shadowy, emphasizing the power of corporate and political influence that operates above uniformed scrutiny. They represent the modern mercenary spirit, efficiency without ethics. Their plan is predicated on maintaining plausible deniability through layers of subcontracting and plausible scenario creation. Swagger's counter-strategy is brilliant because it bypasses these layers. By forcing a direct, visible confrontation with the figurehead orchestrating the plot, he collapses the entire structure built upon anonymity. He understood that in conspiracy, the highest value is secrecy. Therefore, making the conspiracy spectacularly public is the ultimate tactical victory. His expertise, which was designed for silent elimination of enemies of the state, is repurposed for loud, irrefutable exposure of enemies within the state. The resolution isn't merely survival, it is the definitive final mission report that the bureaucracy failed to file. The mastery displayed by Bob Lee Swagger is intrinsically linked to his understanding of physics and human psychology under duress, elements that separate him from common soldiers or mere gunmen. His proficiency isn't just muscle memory, it is a deeply intellectual engagement with the environment. When he sets up his counter-ambush, every choice of ammunition, every adjustment for humidity and altitude, reflects years of dedicated study that others dismiss as esoteric trivia. This dedication elevates his character from a hired gun to a near-mythic figure operating by a higher, more rigid code, a code he ironically must violate to serve true justice. The film celebrates this specialized knowledge, showing the audience that precision itself is a moral force when wielded by the right individual. The recurring motif of the landscape, vast, unpopulated areas where Swagger can operate without leaving an electronic or visual signature, reinforces his alienation from the modern, interconnected world hunting him. He functions best where the rules of modern surveillance break down. In contrast, the conspirators rely entirely on technology and networked information, assuming that their control over data streams equates to control over reality. Swagger defeats them by returning to fundamentals: line of sight, reliable ballistics, and understanding human fallibility. Their hubris lies in believing that no single man, however well trained, could possibly outmaneuver the combined resources of intelligence agencies and private security firms. The emotional climax achieved through his partnership with Memphis centers on the transfer of trust. Swagger, fundamentally unable to trust any institution, places his faith in the young agent's undeveloped but pure sense of duty. Memphis, initially terrified of the fugitive marksman, slowly internalizes Swagger's methodical approach, learning to see deception where he once saw procedure. This unlikely mentorship transcends the immediate threat. It suggests that true competence can only be nurtured through collaboration between different types of expertise: the field operator and the bureaucratic analyst. Moreover, the film subtly critiques the American political fascination with outsourcing lethal force. The true villains are not the soldiers executing the dirty work, but the civilian and political architects who profit from manufactured chaos. They treat life and geopolitical stability as line items on a budget sheet. Swagger, the product of rigorous, taxpayer-funded training meant for national defense, becomes the most dangerous threat to this profit motive. His vengeance, therefore, is not merely personal retribution for being framed. It is a systemic disruption, an attempt to burn down the corrupt marketplace where national security has become the commodity. His final actions are a defiant assertion that some lines of integrity, once crossed by the powerful, can only be restored through definitive, expertly applied force. Swagger's quiet intensity often masks a profound internal conflict, the clash between his ingrained military obedience and his unshakable moral compass. As a scout sniper, his doctrine was absolute obedience to mission parameters. However, the Addis Ababa tragedy shattered the belief that those parameters always serve justice. This residual sense of duty compels him to act, yet he must operate entirely outside the structure he swore to uphold. This creates a constant tension in his performance. He is a man fighting a war against his own former allies, using the playbook he helped write against those who corrupted it. Wahlberg effectively portrays this by keeping Swagger physically restrained, yet his eyes betray the furious calculus happening beneath the surface, constantly modeling multiple threat scenarios. The narrative cleverly positions Sarah Fenn as the emotional validator for Swagger's actions. She represents the collateral damage of the system's deceit, a widow whose trust in the military narrative has been shattered by personal loss. Her quiet acceptance of Swagger is not blind faith, but rather a recognition of shared victimhood. She understands the sacrifices inherent in that life, allowing Swagger a space where he does not have to constantly justify his lethality. She merely accepts his competence as a necessary survival trait in a broken world. This relationship provides the film its rare moments of genuine warmth, small islands of human connection in a sea of conspiracy. Nick Memphis's arc is perhaps the most explicitly redemptive. He begins as the quintessential young federal agent, eager to close the case quickly and neatly, convinced that the system, however flawed, will eventually correct itself. His awakening is triggered by the meticulous nature of the frame job. It is too perfect, too clean, designed by someone who understands internal FBI procedures intimately. When Memphis risks everything to secure a physical piece of evidence that contradicts the official narrative, he is embracing the risk that Swagger embodies. He trades his career stability for ethical clarity, effectively becoming an honorary member of Swagger's specialized circle, one who fights with subpoenas instead of rifle scopes. The film's critique extends deeply into the ethics of private military contractors, exemplified by the primary antagonist. This figure represents the ultimate commodification of violence, a businessman who views geopolitical instability as an opportunity for massive profit through government contracts. Swagger, the finely tuned instrument of the state, becomes an unacceptable variable in their highly calculated business model. Their plan requires a controlled environment. Swagger's very existence proves that individual skill, uncorrupted by bureaucracy or profit motive, can still disrupt the most sophisticated logistical operations. His expertise, initially the state's greatest asset, becomes the ultimate vulnerability for those manipulating the state for private gain. The final confrontation is thus not just about personal clearing of his name, but a calculated strike against the commercialization of covert warfare itself. Swagger's mastery of deception stems from his ingrained understanding of camouflage and concealment, skills that extend beyond physical blending into an environment to include psychological misdirection. He exploits the tunnel vision inherent in his pursuers, the expectation that a fugitive will run towards distance or seek hidden corners. Instead, Swagger repeatedly maneuvers through densely populated areas or utilizes infrastructure designed for high visibility, knowing that the sheer volume of noise and visual data will obscure his precise location. This tactic, often employed by elite reconnaissance units, demonstrates that true hiding is achieved not by invisibility, but by becoming contextually insignificant within a larger, chaotic frame. The film's visual grammar underscores the difference between institutional power and individual acumen. When federal agents sweep an area, the camera movements are broad, sweeping, and slightly clumsy, reflecting overwhelming but undirected force. When Swagger is operating, the camera tightens, utilizing shallow depth of field to focus intensely on small details, the tension in a cable, the slight vibration of a window pane, mirroring his hyper-focused perception. This cinematic choice immerses the viewer in the sniper's world, where success is measured in millimeters and microseconds, a world entirely inaccessible to the bureaucratic operatives chasing him. The emotional payoff between Swagger and Sarah Fenn is predicated on mutual professional respect divorced from politics. Sarah understands the cost of absolute commitment, having loved a man who lived by the code Swagger still adheres to, albeit independently. Her grief becomes the silent engine driving her support, offering Swagger a rare moment of unguarded humanity. In a film dominated by tactical exchanges and procedural chess, these quiet scenes anchor the narrative, reminding the audience that the man they are watching is fighting not just for his freedom, but for the integrity of the sacrifices made by men like Donnie. Memphis's transition is solidified when he stops trying to catch Swagger and starts actively facilitating his objectives. This necessitates a fundamental shift in his investigative philosophy. He must learn to trust the evidence Swagger reveals, even when it means accepting that the FBI is actively obstructing justice. His access to internal communication channels becomes Swagger's ultimate intelligence asset. Memphis realizes that the most dangerous threats are often those hidden behind official memoranda and secure clearances, and that dismantling such a structure requires an insider willing to risk professional ruin for ethical purity. Ultimately, Shooter functions as a meditation on the fate of the perfect tool once its purpose has been corrupted. Swagger was built to execute the nation's difficult decisions cleanly and without moral ambiguity. When the decision-makers introduce moral ambiguity, selling outcomes for political or financial gain, the tool becomes obsolete and dangerous to its owners. His final act is a calculated self-immolation designed to incinerate the false narrative, ensuring that the evidence remains long after he has disappeared back into the margins, leaving behind the indelible mark of a highly specialized conscience refusing to be silenced by compromise. Swagger's ingrained discipline manifests not only in his marksmanship, but in his near-total emotional lockdown. This self-enforced austerity is a direct response to the trauma of Addis Ababa, where the loss of his spotter represented a failure not just of tactics, but of the implicit covenant between soldier and command. His subsequent isolation in the Rockies is a form of self-imposed military quarantine, a space where he can process the unacceptable variable, that his superiors willfully misrepresented or ignored critical intelligence. This psychological burden transforms his every action into a deliberate, cost-benefit analysis, leaving little room for spontaneity or easy camaraderie. He doesn't just survive. He engineers his continued existence based on minimizing footprint and maximizing lethality when necessary. The film uses the contrast between Swagger's analog expertise and the digital reliance of his pursuers to underscore its theme of obsolete loyalty. The conspirators depend on satellite imagery, electronic surveillance, and the presumed efficiency of networked tracking systems. Swagger, conversely, reads the terrain, anticipates atmospheric conditions, and uses terrain features, shadows, wind currents, the reflection off glass, as his primary defense layers. When he scours abandoned military depots for parts to assemble his signature rifle, the sequence is shot with reverence, emphasizing the tangible, mechanical reality of his craft versus the ephemeral, easily manipulated nature of digital data. He is fighting against a phantom army controlled by algorithms, using the concrete reality of applied science. The evolving trust between Swagger and Nick Memphis provides the necessary human texture to what could otherwise be a cold procedural thriller. Memphis's initial approach is rigid, textbook FBI work, characterized by attempts to fit Swagger into established criminal profiles. His disillusionment is palpable when he realizes the conspiracy runs deeper than simple corruption. It is structural sabotage. For Memphis, aligning with Swagger becomes an ideological conversion, a realization that the law requires guardians outside the legal structure when the structure itself is compromised. This bond is cemented not through shared ideology initially, but through shared realization of the scale of the deception, transforming Memphis from a hunter into an essential logistical node for the fugitive. Kate Mara's Sarah Fenn represents the human cost of the military-industrial complex operating without oversight. She is tethered to the memory of a professional warrior, and she recognizes the same unwavering commitment in Swagger, even though he is branded a traitor. Her support is crucial because it provides Swagger with a necessary link to a moral community, however small. She doesn't ask him to stop being dangerous. She accepts that his danger is directed toward the right targets. This relationship humanizes Swagger, suggesting that even the most hardened operative requires acknowledgement of his past sacrifices to fuel his fight for the future. The thematic weight of the film settles on the idea of the expert betrayed. Swagger is the ultimate professional, capable of making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure with near-perfect accuracy. The conspiracy's fatal error is assuming that removing him physically would resolve the threat. They failed to account for the fact that a man trained to see the entire operational picture, including the aftermath, would plan his own vindication meticulously. His final gambit, forcing the entire hierarchy of the conspiracy into a single, visible location, is a final lesson in targeting. He ensures maximum impact, not just for immediate justice, but for systemic shock, guaranteeing that the evidence of their malfeasance cannot be easily buried under layers of plausible deniability. Swagger's return from the wilderness is characterized by an almost supernatural integration into the urban environment, a phenomenon stemming from his training to utilize the noise of civilization as camouflage. He is not hiding in the woods. He is hiding in plain sight within the chaos of human activity, treating traffic patterns and commuter schedules with the same precision he once applied to calculating wind drift over long ranges. This ability to become an unremarkable fixture in a dynamic setting speaks volumes about the depth of his conditioning. He is not reacting to the environment. He is actively shaping how he is perceived by it, or rather, how he is not perceived. Wahlberg's performance nails this by maintaining a low physical profile, moving with an economy of motion that suggests every single step is accounted for in a larger operational plan. The antagonists, particularly the private security consultant driving the assassination plot, operate under the delusion that control is synonymous with access to information networks. Their organizational structure is designed to be opaque, relying on layers of insulated operatives to maintain plausible deniability, a classic strategy in modern covert operations. However, their fatal flaw, as Swagger perceives it, is their lack of true field experience. They understand bureaucracy and finance, but they fail to grasp the absolute commitment of a man whose entire professional life has been dedicated to achieving a singular, critical objective regardless of personal cost. They treat the assassination as a project. Swagger treats it as the only mission left. The emotional trajectory of Nick Memphis is marked by escalating moral courage. Initially bound by the rigid structure of the FBI manual, Memphis begins to see the procedural safeguards as obstacles to genuine justice. His clandestine meetings with Swagger are acts of profound personal risk, transforming him from an ambitious investigator into a vital conspirator against corruption. The film shows him using his federal credentials not to arrest, but to misdirect other agencies, adopting the very subterfuge he was trained to expose. This dual role, official investigator by day, rebel informant by night, highlights the ethical compromises required when fighting an enemy embedded within one's own institutional framework. Sarah Fenn serves as the moral compass that Swagger can never fully trust, but desperately needs to acknowledge. Her unwavering belief in Donnie's honor acts as a proxy validation for Swagger's own code. She understands that the true sin of the Addis Ababa mission was not the tactical outcome, but the lie that followed it. When she aids Swagger, she is not merely helping a fugitive. She is honoring the memory of the system as it should have been, a system that protects its own integrity rather than sacrificing its best soldiers for political expediency. Her emotional stability offers Swagger a brief respite from the hypervigilance necessary for survival. The climax of the film is a masterclass in applied military psychology. Swagger doesn't just seek escape, he seeks public clarity. By orchestrating the scenario where the conspirators are forced to reveal themselves, often through their panic when their technological superiority is neutralized by Swagger's low-tech, high-skill countermeasures, he forces a confession through action. The final confrontation is less a shootout and more a highly specialized demonstration, proving that expertise, when correctly aimed, remains the single most potent force against organized deceit. Swagger's departure at the end is not a surrender to isolation, but a strategic retreat back into the shadows, having successfully delivered the necessary intelligence package, the truth, to the only agency left capable of processing it: the public domain. The enduring power of Shooter resides in its dissection of institutional failure, showing how the very structures designed for defense can become the primary vectors of betrayal. Swagger is the ultimate casualty of this system, a man whose entire identity was forged in the crucible of specialized, absolute duty, only to find that duty has been outsourced and perverted by profit margins. His exile is not mere survival. It is a prolonged, agonizing act of mourning for the ideals he once served. The psychological toll is visible in his relentless need for control. The wilderness offers a predictable matrix of physics, a stark contrast to the unpredictable, morally fluid landscape of Washington, D.C. politics. Wahlberg's portrayal hinges on restraint. Swagger rarely raises his voice. His intensity is conveyed through micro-expressions, the tightening around the jaw when confronted with evidence of foul play, the almost imperceptible hesitation before accepting help. When he meticulously cleans his gear or studies topographical maps, it is a form of active meditation, a way to keep the chaos of betrayal at bay by focusing on quantifiable realities. He treats every interaction, even with Sarah, as a potential vulnerability to be managed, a defense mechanism so deeply ingrained that dropping it feels akin to abandoning the mission entirely. The relationship with Sarah Fenn is vital because she embodies the civilian world that Swagger has been trained to protect, but has never truly inhabited. She sees the soldier, the honor code, beneath the fugitive status. Her quiet grief mirrors his own unacknowledged guilt, the feeling that he, the protector, failed to shield Donnie. By aiding him, she is effectively granting him absolution from the judgment of a corrupt state, affirming that his commitment to truth, even outside the law, is worthy. Their bond is built on the shared vocabulary of sacrifice, offering Swagger the only brief moments where he is not assessing a threat, but simply being acknowledged. Memphis's transformation is the narrative's ethical engine. He starts as a functionary, proud of his place within the Bureau, but his deep-seated training in evidence collection becomes the tool for his insurrection. The moment he handles the physical evidence that implicates his superiors, the abstract concept of institutional corruption becomes a tangible, immediate threat to his own life. His transition from rule follower to active accomplice is a visceral leap of faith, motivated by the realization that some protocols exist only to protect power, not justice. He utilizes his insider knowledge to disrupt the system's own sophisticated containment protocols, proving that information warfare requires both external precision, Swagger, and internal access, Memphis. The conspirators, by contrast, are characterized by organizational arrogance. They believe that by controlling the flow of information and leveraging massive financial resources, they can dictate reality. They rely on the assumption that the individual soldier, once removed from the chain of command, is negligible, a mere rogue element easily contained or eliminated. Their failure to account for Swagger's singular dedication and his ability to weaponize the very operational doctrines they copied is the film's core dramatic irony. Swagger's final strategy is not just to survive, but to engineer a scenario so public and so undeniable that the conspiracy's carefully constructed layers of plausible deniability collapse under the weight of irrefutable, high-profile exposure. He cleans house by ensuring the mess cannot be swept under the rug by the powerful men who created it. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Q-Man channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you enjoy the content. Today, we are going to be discussing the 2007 film, Shooter. The film opens, and we immediately sense the quiet intensity surrounding Bob Lee Swagger, a man whose past as an elite Marine sniper weighs heavily on his shoulders. He's someone clearly haunted, someone who found a certain kind of peace only in the precise solitude of long-range shooting, a skill honed through years serving his country, perhaps reflecting the disciplined focus required in any high-stakes profession where a single mistake costs everything. Now retired, or at least trying to be, he lives a life steeped in the kind of rugged independence often sought by those who have seen too much structured chaos. Suddenly, this isolation is shattered. Swagger is pulled back into the game by Colonel Greg Cuff, a man who speaks with the clipped authority of military bureaucracy. Cuff appeals to Swagger's ingrained sense of duty, presenting a scenario so dire it seems almost unavoidable: an alleged threat to the president during an upcoming public address in Philadelphia. Swagger, despite his deep-seated reservations, the kind that build up after witnessing the messy realities behind clean military victories, agrees to scope out the area, a final consultation before the event. It's a classic setup, the reluctant hero pulled out of retirement, reminiscent perhaps of the archetypes explored in classic westerns, where the best gunman is always needed one last time. Swagger, meticulous as ever, sets up his perch and conducts the surveillance. But when the president appears, the supposed shooter, whom Swagger was meant to track, is nowhere to be seen. Instead, Swagger finds himself walking into an expertly laid trap. Shots ring out, and the situation rapidly devolves into chaos, with Swagger immediately becoming the prime suspect in an assassination attempt. The efficiency of the setup suggests a conspiracy far deeper than a simple rogue operative. He manages a narrow escape, fueled by instinct honed over countless simulated firefights. Now a fugitive, Swagger is relentlessly hunted, not just by the FBI, led by the determined agent Nick Memphis, a young man still believing firmly in the black-and-white nature of justice, but also by dangerous internal forces intent on keeping the truth buried. Swagger's survival depends entirely on utilizing the very skills that made him legendary. His first priority is to find the truth behind the frame-up. He realizes he needs help, finding refuge with Donnie Fenn, a former spotter and close comrade whose partnership in the field was legendary. These were men who understood non-verbal communication better than spoken word. This reunion is brief and tragic, emphasizing the peril Swagger faces. Donnie is killed, but not before providing a crucial clue: the real shooter. The path inevitably leads him to Sarah, Donnie's widow. Sarah is a figure who carries her own quiet burden, likely accustomed to the shadows that follow men like her husband. Initially resistant, she comes to understand Swagger's desperate need for exoneration. Her presence grounds him, offering a fleeting connection to the normal life he craves. She is the anchor to the moral compass Swagger fights to maintain. As Swagger digs deeper, the pieces point toward a powerful, shadowy figure with significant governmental ties. He uncovers evidence suggesting the entire operation was a false flag, designed to justify a far more aggressive military action overseas, likely involving lucrative arms deals or geopolitical maneuvering that requires public outrage as its catalyst. This narrative echoes the cynical view that sometimes manufactured crises serve powerful interests better than genuine peace. The FBI agent, Memphis, begins to have doubts about the neat narrative presented to him. He notices inconsistencies in the evidence and witnesses' testimonies, the kind of details a dedicated investigator, one who perhaps studied police procedure obsessively, inspired by gritty procedural dramas, would catch. His internal conflict mirrors the audience's growing suspicion. The hunter might be chasing the wrong man. The climax brings Swagger to a confrontation, not in the shadows, but out in the open, orchestrated by Swagger himself to force the real perpetrators into the light. He engineers a scenario mirroring the initial framing, but this time he controls the variables. He uses his mastery of trajectory, environmental awareness, and psychological manipulation to expose the conspiracy involving the powerful interests, perhaps including elements within the military intelligence apparatus that once sponsored him. In the final tense standoff, Swagger faces the architect of the frame-up. He doesn't just fight, he systematically dismantles their plan, using precision over brute force. Memphis arrives just as the truth is revealed, finally seeing Swagger not as a criminal, but as a man whose honor compelled him to expose corruption, even at the cost of his own freedom. The film concludes with the conspiracy dismantled, though the sense of lingering danger remains. Swagger, having proven his innocence and perhaps re-establishing a sliver of faith in justice, retreats once more into the quiet anonymity he prefers, the lone wolf having successfully defended the system that tried to destroy him. Swagger's initial retreat into the Montana wilderness wasn't merely a geographical change. It was a deep psychological withdrawal. The rugged landscape suited a man whose internal world was defined by precise calculations and the stark reality of life and death seen through a high-powered scope. One could imagine his daily routine mirroring the discipline of his former life. Early mornings, rigorous physical maintenance, and a profound silence broken only by the wind. He wasn't just hiding. He was trying to exorcise the ghosts of missions past, the collateral damage that inevitably stained the hands of even the most principled soldiers. When Cuff arrives, the weight of military expectations settles back onto Swagger's shoulders like a heavy, familiar coat. Cuff, steeped in the institutional belief that complex problems require decisive, often ruthless action, plays upon Swagger's inherent sense of responsibility, a code that runs deeper than personal comfort. Swagger's hesitation is palpable. He understands that stepping back into that world means signing up for moral compromise. His assent is given with the grim acceptance of a man who knows the game is rigged before the first card is dealt. The framing sequence in Philadelphia is executed with terrifying efficiency. It speaks to an enemy capable of mirroring Swagger's own lethal capabilities, an insult that cuts deeper than any physical wound. When the shots are fired and the immediate assumption is his guilt, Swagger reacts with the cold, practiced instinct of someone who has spent years rehearsing emergency responses. His escape is not random flight. It's tactical repositioning, using urban clutter as cover, demonstrating that even under extreme duress, his military training dictates his every move. He is a ghost slipping through the city's grid, visible only to those actively looking for him. The loss of Donnie Fenn is the emotional pivot. Donnie, the partner who saw the world through the other end of Swagger's scope, represented the last tangible connection to a life of defined loyalty. His death is brutal, reinforcing that the conspiracy values absolute silence. For Swagger, this loss ignites a fury beneath the calm veneer. It transforms his defense into a relentless pursuit of vengeance, filtered through his methodical nature. Sarah, Donnie's widow, becomes the reluctant repository of Swagger's truth. She carries the sorrow common to the families of covert operators, the waiting, the unspoken knowledge that their loved ones operate outside the conventional rules. When she chooses to trust Swagger, it is an act of faith rooted in her understanding of the warrior ethos. She knows the man Donnie respected would not commit such an act of betrayal. Her quiet strength provides a necessary counterpoint to Swagger's escalating violence, reminding him of the innocence he is fighting to preserve. As Agent Memphis closes in, he represents the ideal the system pretends to uphold. Memphis is tenacious, driven by the absolute certainty of protocol, his slow, agonizing realization that the evidence is too perfect, too manufactured, is the film's secondary narrative tension. He sees the patterns that Swagger's pursuers overlooked, the deliberate planting of ballistic evidence, the convenient suicide of a supposed accomplice. Memphis's journey mirrors Swagger's in reverse, moving from rigid adherence to the rules toward a messy, necessary acceptance of situational truth. Swagger's counteroffensive is a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare, leveraging his intimate knowledge of surveillance, counter-surveillance, and the bureaucracy that employs men like Cuff. He doesn't just fight back, he lays traps designed to expose the architect's own vulnerabilities, manipulating media attention and law enforcement focus. The final confrontation, orchestrated to expose the political mastermind, a man perhaps groomed in the same strategic schools Swagger once attended, is not about killing the enemy, but about proving their machinations beyond any reasonable doubt. It's a sniper's ultimate trick, making the target kill himself with the wrong target. In the end, Swagger achieves a grim victory, reclaiming his honor not through military citation, but through the defiant, solitary act of setting the record straight against overwhelming institutional power. The mechanics of Swagger's survival are deeply rooted in the psychological conditioning of elite military training. Every move he makes against the vast network hunting him is a calculated countermove. When he needs to secure resources or transport, he doesn't rely on conventional means. He exploits known vulnerabilities in logistics chains, areas he likely mapped extensively during his service for potential enemy ingress or egress. This suggests a man for whom contingency planning is not an academic exercise, but a visceral second nature. One imagines his mind constantly running scenarios, overlaid with terrain data and probability tables, a habit impossible to shed. His pursuit of the mastermind reveals the chilling symbiosis between global politics and the private security apparatus. The villain, likely a defense contractor or high-ranking official operating outside typical oversight, embodies the kind of unchecked ambition Swagger spent his career fighting against overseas. This adversary views life, and especially national security crises, as commodities, opportunities for profit and power consolidation. This contrast between the sniper who kills only when ordered for a specific strategic goal and the corrupt official who engineers crises for financial gain defines the moral chasm Swagger must cross. The development of the relationship with Sarah takes on a desperate urgency. She becomes more than just a source of information. She is a fragile testament to the human cost of the shadows these men inhabit. When Swagger shares details of the setup, his voice likely carries the careful modulation of a man who fears even his own words might be monitored. He is exposing his soul, piece by piece, to the one person who can understand the burden of a life defined by lethal competence. Her support isn't loud, it's the quiet act of tending to his wounds, both physical and psychological, allowing the hardened shell of the sniper to momentarily crack. Agent Memphis's gradual conversion is fascinating. His initial fervor, fueled by career ambition and a textbook belief in immediate guilt, slowly erodes as the evidence seems too neatly packaged. Memphis likely spent late nights poring over surveillance footage, noticing the minute discrepancies, a lack of anticipated recoil, an unnatural shadow in the periphery, details that only someone intimately familiar with tactical operations would flag. This internal crisis forces the FBI agent to confront the possibility that the institution he serves is profoundly corrupt, a realization that often breaks men who place ultimate faith in the badge. His final decision to align, however briefly, with Swagger is the moment he chooses actual justice over procedural correctness. The finale is orchestrated chaos, controlled entirely by Swagger's long-range vision. He doesn't seek a direct firefight. He engineers a situation where the guilty parties must expose their complicity through their own panicked reactions, often using the environment to his advantage, a classic sniper tactic applied to urban warfare. He manipulates sightlines, forcing the conspirators to expose themselves to the surveillance they thought they controlled. When the true orchestrator is cornered, the confrontation is less about bullets and more about the dismantling of a facade. Swagger's final act is to ensure the evidence is irrefutable, leaving behind not a body count, but an undeniable paper trail of treason,